deliver the great negative confession of faith. Therefore, to the body would have to be associated a living attendant to speak for the body and to act as the intermediary again between the living and the dead. And this intermediary should be either Anubis or Horus himself. Therefore, there is the possibility that the ritual was given as an actual mortuary rite. There would be no reason then to doubt that an Egyptian of lesser estate, who could not afford or was not entitled by the caste system of his time to any such elaborate ritual, might then be interred with a manuscript copy, as was commonly talismanically done, with the idea or concept that he would then have available to him all of the passwords of the degrees, all of the keys to the various gates of the divisions of the underworld, that he might know the answers and the proper deportment when he entered into the presence of the great gods in the hall of the Twin Chiefs. These things were therefore interred with him, along with other materials which might be of use to him. It was customary, for instance, to inter with a scribe his stylus and his writing tablet. It was not quite certain who he would write to, but at the same time, this was ceremonialism. He might feel, while resting quietly in the tomb, an irresistible desire to make a few notes. If such was the case, he must have the necessary equipment. Therefore, in your magical belief, the moment you assume that the soul has an existence apart from the body, you may assume that this soul has some continuance in living, and may have, therefore, interests like or similar to those of the living persons in this world. The second use of the religious ritual, as in the case of the Egyptian mystery, would be the pure problem of initiating a living person into the mysteries of the other world. This would be a ceremonial. It would be very much in the order of an ordination or a high mass performed to stimulate the spiritual power of the observer. The Egyptians definitely believed in a mnemonic system. That is, that by presenting the soul of the living person with a certain spectacle about divine matter, the soul within the person would be aroused, would leap forth in joy to behold that which was its own nature, or would hold upon the truth revealed, because these truths were already sleeping in the soul. Therefore, that through the ceremony, the sleeping truths in the soul would be awakened, and the person would have the experience of knowing the mystery behind the ritual. In either instance, then, the rite could be conceived to have been ceremonially portrayed, and the proper place for such ceremony would certainly be in the subterranean passages of the temple, or in some place isolated, or in some place of darkness away from the common convention of man, because this place must represent otherworldness. We have gradually developed in Western religion a practice or policy of placing crypts under cathedrals for the burial of the sanctified dead. The Egyptians did not follow this practice, but they also definitely did use their crypts or subterranean rooms to represent the world of the dead, practice which we find among the Latins in the old catacombs of Rome, long before the rise of Christianity. So if these rites were given, as Plutarch tells us, they were certainly given nocturnally, because they related to darkness, not by nature of evil, but by nature of hiddenness, that they related to the sun of the soul which shines in the night. And as Apelius describes in his initiation into the mystery, he says that it was at night that he placed his foot upon the threshold of Proserpine, and beheld the sun shining through the earth beneath his feet. These rituals, then, were the rituals of the night sun. They were the rituals of Osiris, the mysterious deity of the subconscious. And it was in these rites that something within the subconscious experience of man was stimulated. I suspect that Egyptologists are going to have to gradually take on and accept the psychological significance of ritualism. They're going to have to realize that this type of psychic stimulation is archetypal, and that rituals were gradually revelations of the subconscious, perhaps given at one primitive time through dreams and visions. But certainly they have a root in the folk consciousness of man. And from this consciousness they call forth something when they are repeated or correctly performed. So for a moment we will attempt to restore some of this concept in the idea of the initiation, perhaps we can say, of Adi, scribe of Pharaoh. Now, we do not need to assume necessarily that Adi is dead, but in the manuscript that accompanied his mummy in the sarcophagus, this manuscript certainly implies that he has passed into the Amentet. The eschatology again comes to the fore, however. What happens to the soul of Adi, who is Osiris? Does this soul rest forever in the paradisical abode of the great God, or does it come forth again? By the time of the rise of the Osirian sect, it seems that rebirth had already invaded Egypt as a concept. The probabilities are that the eschatology in Egypt finally centers upon the idea of Palingenesis, or of the various returns, renovations, restoration, of the rising of the soul from its own dead, the Greek concept of metempsychosis. So we will say that either Ani as the dead or Ani as the candidate is prepared for the ritual of the coming forth by day. If he is alive and is a neophyte to the temple, it appears that he was initiated singly, that there were no group initiations on this level, although there were what were called the orgies of the gods. In those days, the word orgy did not have a negative implication. It now merely meant ceremony. It did not mean dissipations of any kind. The tie between our present thought and the old word is ecstasis. It was the ecstasy, or the enthusiasm from entheos, in God. It was a divine ecstasy. But gradually, in the Roman world, it began to be confused with the bacchanalia, which was not its original meaning. But in any event, the candidate, accompanied by a guide, appointed for this purpose, enters into the temple, is met by the priest with torches, and is led downward. Either he is led actually downward, or symbolically the idea and concept of a descent is implied to him. I would suspect that in most cases some form of a descent was actually made. Perhaps only a few feet, perhaps 25 or 50 feet. But he was taken downward through darkness. And at various intervals along the road he was stopped and interrogated. And because he was as yet unenlightened in these mysteries, he was vouched for and taken forward by his guide, the one that was appointed, until finally, after certain adventures and mysteries associated with symbolism, and if the temple was exceedingly well equipped, including a boat ride across a subterranean stream. Now, this subterranean stream might have been only a pond or pool, and possibly the boat maybe took only 3 or 4 strokes of the oar to cross it. But this was essential, because even in those days, the land of the gods was on the other shore. The river by which souls in this life are divided from the souls in the other life is the same as the river Styx in the Greek mystery, or the mysterious celestial Jordan, on whose farther shore we are to meet in everlasting bliss, according to the ancient hymn of Christianity. Having reached the other shore now, having passed the veil of the mysteries between this world and the next, the candidate for initiation is conducted into the great hall of the spring tree, which is brilliantly lighted with candles or tapers or torches, probably originally with torches made of thongs of wood. This room was well filled, for here were gathered all the persons involved in the great rite. Seated on the elevated throne was Osiris, probably wearing a mask of gold, and fully equipped with all of the symbols of his rank and office. He was accompanied also by Isis and Nephthys. Isis wearing upon her head the empty stone to symbolize the martyrdom of her husband, and Nephthys bearing upon her head the symbol of a bowl to carry consecrated water. Before the throne of Osiris, the scales of the cyclostatia had been set up for the great ceremony of the weighing of the soul. The cynocephalus ape sat upon the balance of the scales. Post Hermes, Trismegistus, the recorder of the gods, with a mask with the ibis head, stood holding his stylus, the stylus and the writing tablet. Anubis, with the head of the jackal, was there. Horus was also present with the golden head of a hawk. Along one wall was gathered the 42 assessors, representing the jury of the dead. There was present also Typhon, the destroyer, because in this heavenly accumulation or assembly, the spirit of negation must also be. Likewise present was Maat, the goddess of justice, represented as either blindfolded or without eyes, or wearing a mask without eyes, also wearing upon her head the ostrich plume of the law. In addition to these just present, would also now be included Adi, who is Osiris. He comes in, raises his 2 hands at right angles upward, and forms the sign of the Ka, the symbol of the soul. He says, I am a soul. And the form of his body in the ritual makes the hieroglyph to symbolize that he is unbodied, that he is a living soul that has achieved freedom from body. Now this may mean either that he is dead, and therefore has departed from body, or that by the studies, mysticism, religion, and philosophy of the temple, he has achieved the release of his soul from the delusion of body. In any way, he speaks of the victory of the soul or life over the body by the position of his hand. He is then led forward into the presence of this assembly of the gods. And here he is presented with the negative confession of faith. In this particular case, the assessors or the jurors present the various articles of the negative confession. Or the herald of the court, Hermes, may himself read the sacred liturgy of the question. It is said that the Egyptian was a proud man, that he would not accept a positive confession of faith. He would not end his confession by saying, I have. He would only finish it by saying, I have not. Therefore, the questions are all so stated that the answer, the positive answer, is, I have not. So then begins the interrogation of the soul of Osiris, who was Amen. And in the course of interrogation, the assessors, the jurors, and the great God, who leads all minds and hearts, remain silent while the deceased person or the novice seeking initiation is interrogated. This interrogation is probably one of the most important ethical monuments in the philosophy of mankind, for it represents in its substance a code so extraordinarily high that it is doubtful if any person today could answer it correctly and with integrity all of these questions and assume that he had lived what they require. Also in the negative confession we find a great many ideas of good and ill which are quite advanced, in fact far further advanced than our own code, because this code definitely judges the individual not only by his actions, by his words, by his deeds, but by his most intimate thoughts, by his deepest convictions, by the most secret of his purposes. Also, he is judged by the very abstract motive behind the things that he has done. He is also expected to be able to state clearly that he has not been jealous of any other living being throughout life, that he has said no untrue word about any person, either in seriousness or in jest, that he has never taken from any person anything that that other person did not give freely. Now that would be pretty tough even in the 20th century. It's getting tougher every day, we might add. Also, we know that the Egyptian was one of the few people who listed the psychological mistakes that we make. That the negative confession infers that the individual must have conquered fear within himself. Not the fear of the known, but the fear of the unknown. That he must have transcended all doubt about universal good. That he must be free from excessive grief. That he must be free from excessive worry. That he must have in himself no negative quality which would in any way defile the Osiris in his own soul. Well, several writers and students of the matter have come to the conclusion that the Egyptian, either living or dead, that took this examination had to, we'll say, somewhat exaggerate his virtue, and perhaps overlook a few mistakes along the line. But in the ritualism although he is honest and in the right, the candidate does admit his mistake. He does not attempt to give all positive answers. He does not claim to be without fault. This is in fact part of the ritual itself. For when the confession of the confession of faith is finished, and the negative confession has been completed, there is in all present a certain doubt as to whether the candidate for this honor, or this recognition as a spiritual being, is truly justified. At that time also, the heart of the Osiris Rishwavani is placed upon one balance of the scale. And the goddess Maya takes her feather, the symbol of law, universal law, and places it on the other balanced pan. If the two pans of the scale balance, if the heart is balanced with truth, if all the laws of nature balance the heart, then it is assumed that the Osiris Rishwavani is true and noble. This is the final test. But in the testing, the balance is not quite perfect. And the heart of the Osiris Rishwavani cries out from a little lip in the side of the jar, which is supposed to contain his mummified heart. And this voice cries out to the great god Osiris. It says, Father of all good, permit not that I shall perish with the king who ruleth for a day. Now, the king who ruleth for a day is obviously inclined or intended to represent the personality. It is the outer or personal material ego of the individual. It is this which has been weighed and tried in the balance, as the apocalypse says, and has been found wanting. Therefore, the cry of the soul goes up, but it shall not die with the king who ruleth for a day. And the assessors are very solemn. The great jurors of the dead must contemplate the virtues and vices of this soul as to whether it shall be able to enter into the blessedness of an death. And in this emergency, Horus steps forward. And Horus says, I intercede for this soul. If this soul's virtues are not entirely equal to the law we know, but I offer myself as hostage for this soul. And if this soul shall fail, let the failure be upon me. If this soul is not worthy, let me be punished. Let my virtues be placed with the virtues of this soul upon the scale. And with my virtues added, the balance will be made. And the god Osiris meditates upon this problem for a moment. He is silent and he lost his soul, and seems not entirely convinced even then. And Horus speaks to him again and says to him, O my Father, who is myself, thy Son, who is thyself, asks it. To refuse me is to refuse your own heart. Therefore, there is again silence. The assessors consider the matter, and finally the verdict is brought in. That the soul, plus the love of God, has made the balance. The soul is then permitted to pass into the realms of the blessed. Now the theory is contained in the ritual that if for some reason this soul entering in is so corrupted that it cannot make the body, and that Osiris under these conditions rejects the sacrifice of his own son, who offers himself as a peace offering unto the Lord. If the soul fails utterly, then Typhon steps forward, the deity represented with the head of a crocodile and the body of a horse, and claims the soul. And if this soul is released to Typhon, Typhon then devours the soul and carries the soul away into darkness, where it is believed or supposed that the soul passes back into re-embodiment. For Typhon is the symbol of the mud hog of the Nile, the symbol of utter materiality. And therefore, to be followed up by Typhon is to be reborn in the physical world. It is now assumed, however, that the successful candidate has passed the test with the assistance of Horus. Therefore, the successful candidate approaches his father. The soul comes into the presence of the immediate light of the golden face of the sun. And Osiris holds forth the key to the world, and bestows this key as a symbol of everlasting grace. And the key, of course, is the Crux Ansata, the unfettered cross of Egypt, the cross with a root for an upper bar. And when this cross is placed upon the lips of the deceased or the initiate, it is a symbol of the life bestowed, the symbol of the forgiveness of all evil, and that the candidate or the soul has been given the gift of everlasting life. Now it remains for Osiris to bestow this. For the life of everlastingness is not automatically the result of the passing the ritual. The life of everlastingness must be given or awarded to the soul by Osiris. But when Osiris so does this Crux Ansata becomes the word of the life and the resurrection. And having been sealed with this, the soul passes triumphantly to its just reward, goes triumphantly to that better life which is its proper estate. Now it is quite understandable that a ritual of this kind would have very deep transcendental import, especially if it is something that is held and deeply believed by all who witness it. The candidate undoubtedly had been instructed in the temple prior to initiation, or the deceased Ani, the scribe of Pharaoh, was well informed in the state religion. They had passed to a certain degree of comprehension. They knew the meaning of the ritual. And we are then in the same condition almost as we might say the individual is who takes the Eucharist or the ordination of a priest. In each instance, that which is to occur is known in advance. But by some mystery of transubstantiation, these physical things become peculiarly related to metaphysical truths beyond themselves. And it is to be assumed, therefore, that the initiate, having received this mystery, was in some way internally altered. That with this faith, with this participation in the highest and most secret rites of his people, with this blessing and benediction of the hierophant of the mystery, who undoubtedly impersonated Osiris, that more than a mere drama was intended. As in the elevation of the host at high mass, to the believer, there is a spiritual mystery. But this mystery bestows some alteration, some change, like the laying on of hands in the apostolic succession. That there is something by which all things are made new, by a mystery of faith itself, by a mystery of religion itself. And if these people were raised, particularly those eligible for the sacred rituals, in a philosophic atmosphere, had been educated by a system of culture in which religion was the lord over all the arts and sciences, and in which the achievement of the sanctified life was the most important of all achievements, and that as the candidate, the initiate might wait for years until the hierophant regarded him as qualified and worthy for this extraordinary honor. We cannot but doubt that in the religion in which the priest himself was the very extension of his God, where these things were rarely and deeply and concisely believed, that some type of profound psychological experience took place. Plato describes it, others have described it. Achilles tells all that he dares to tell it. But according to the reports of these witnesses, at the moment of the great initiation, all these mortal elements vanished. The figure seated upon the throne with the golden mask was no longer the priest. He was Osiris. Something happened within the person accepting the ritual. Some light blazed from within himself. And as Achilles says, all of these priestly persons were suddenly radiant. They became the very beings that they represented. Perhaps the priests themselves did not even know it. But in the heart and soul of the initiate, some kind of an internal experience occurred, by which he was no longer in the subterranean room of an ancient temple. He was in the mysterious underworld of Osiris. And in a kind of hypnotic trance or ecstasy, with a strange exhilaration of the greatest religious experience that he could conceive, this person was suddenly touched by a great cleansing, so that never again was he quite the same person. A stage has been set for him, by which he is actually enabled to pass through a mystical experience. Everything was right in the psychology and chemistry of his own conscience. And in the supreme moment of the ritual, all of the ceremony suddenly became real. And in that instant of reality, the person lost all human dimension. He was Osiris. he was in the presence of the great psychic principle of the world. Perhaps it was in this moment of the unfoldment of his own psychic center that he was aware of this experience. But someday, in the course of time, perhaps, we will understand the psychic life of man better, and we will realize that such experiences can occur, that they do not have to be delusions, that perhaps they do represent a tremendous spiritual inward realization by which things are transformed in a mystery. And in this mystery, we have the very substance of mysticism and the pure. This, as far as we can carry it in our modern world knowledge, tells us something of the religion of the Egyptians. And I believe it tells us something of rather psychological import to us now in our own question as to the realities that lie behind the shadows of appearance. In some way, the Egyptians were able to pierce this appearance through his ritual. And perhaps we will ultimately regain the understanding of this if we consider psychological research in the terms of religious experience. Well, I guess our time is up, so we'll have to let it rest until next week, when we will take another group of religious rituals. I should really not say next week, because actually, I believe next Wednesday we're not meeting. Let me take another look. Someone just handed me this. I shouldn't be in any uncertainty about it. I'll have to just refresh my mind. Yes, next Sunday is Memorial Day. So we hope that many of you will also perhaps see in this a little ritual of some nature, a little mysticism to tie us perhaps with the sacrifice that others have made to help us to have a way of life. There is something about all these rituals, pageantries, and days of solemn celebration. And perhaps if we understand one, we will understand the other. All these things are part of life of the mystery. Thank you very much.